Hey, this is Sanyam Bhutani, and you're listening to Chai Time Data Science, a podcast for data science enthusiasts where I interview practitioners, researchers, and Kagglers about their journey, experience, and talk all things about data science. Welcome to another episode in the Chai Time Data Science Show. In this episode, I'm really excited to be interviewing one of the inspirations in the intersection of medical sciences and AI, Dr. Judy Gichoya. Dr. Judy is currently an assistant professor at the Emory University School of Medicine. She is also a project maintainer and contributor to Liber Health and Open MRS open source projects. And she has a background in medicine and surgery with a master's degree. Dr. Judy is kind enough to share many great advices for people on both sides of the table, people from AI interested in working in medicine and people with a background in medicine interested in applying machine learning or such techniques to their work. We talk a lot about the intersection of medical sciences, AI, and open source, Judy's journey into these intersections, about her projects, and her current research. If you enjoy these interviews, please feel free to subscribe to my newsletter. You can find the link in the description. I release 2 interviews each week on Thursdays and Sundays. For now, here's the interview with Dr. Judy. Please enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. I am on the call with Dr. Judy Gichoya. Thank you so much, Judy, for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, you're currently working as an assistant professor at the Emory University School of Medicine, and you have a background in a very interesting intersection that we'll just talk about, the intersection of medicine, open source, and artificial intelligence. But before that, could you tell the listeners how you got interested in machine learning and how did you get started in that?
So I would say that I've been sort of a little bit lucky, just at the right place, right time. And my home is actually in Kenya, and so
Mm-hmm.
I'm a very late immigrant because I'm always in the U.S. I went to medical school in Kenya, and sort of was always at the sometimes at the right place, and I got
Yeah.
involved in technology just because I was very curious how we could use it for patient care. And then
Mhm.
moving on from there, I came into the US because I wanted to do a clinical specialization. And
Okay.
so really my draw to AI was also just a lucky accident because
Mhm.
around 2006, I think, I don't know if you've seen the video where Geoff Hinton says that we should we should not train radiologists because they're
I
going to
have.
be replaced. And that really spurred this uproar in the radiology societies because people were threatened, they were scared because this was something new. But
Yeah.
I was like, oh wow, what's this? So I went in, and that's how I got involved. And
Okay.
while it was different, I would say that right now it's with internet, it's a little easier to get involved because you can watch YouTube, you can do the
Yeah.
moves and sort of get a grasp of a little bit of a grasp of AI. I don't want to
So
simplify.
for context, when you get started, I think this was around 2006 and 7. You mentioned, so I don't think there was even the Andrew Ng's famous course back in the day.
So my first starting, to be honest, was more recently, I would say, through over the last maybe 5 years with when we've had this big sort of so it's not 2006, it's 2016. So
Okay.
so it's just been like 3 years. And so we have to check that actually on
Okay.
Geoff Hinton. Yeah. But we like his video, but we have I would say that most of my time has been essentially uh, learning because of my friends, the people around me who are computer scientists, and also sort of self-directed learning because I experiment a lot and I'm always trying to replicate models and learn them that way. So my way of getting started, actually, I paid for the machine learning course by Udacity, the nano degree.
Okay.
But I honestly did not finish it because I did not complete it because it was really like amorphous. Because I remember asking the teaching assistant, like, oh, why am I setting this learning grades? It's like, because, and I was like, okay, this is not how I learn. And so I got very disinterested pretty fast. And so ultimately I ended up getting involved with Jeremy Howard,
Okay.
the course by Jeremy and Matt Rachel and Rachel Thomas. And we, I found that this was something that made more sense for me because I could, try something and then be like, oh, that's the
The
harmony.
top-down approach, as they call it.
Yes, yeah. So I think that those are the better ones. But I've watched a lot of courses. I've watched through Andrew Ng's. I'm watching some. I still keep watching them as I go on.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Also curious, how did you get started in medicine and radiology? So what was the reason for you taking this up as a career path?
So, I mean, when you grow up in Kenya, there's not much of a choice because when you
Okay.
do well in school, then you become a doctor or an engineer. So that was, I would say, I'm not going to be here and say that, oh, I had a big calling. I did not. But when I got into medical school, I really enjoyed it. And my school was based around something called problem-based learning, which is very interesting because and maybe that's why I like the top-down approach, because it's like,
Right.
very problem based, and so I really enjoyed working there and enjoyed being a physician. But through then we were taking care of a lot of HIV patients, which is how I got involved in open source.
Okay.
And because then there was a homegrown open source solution that was coming up and being developed to help us sort of take care of this huge burden of HIV patients. And so I got involved in building medical record system, and I got involved in the open source community. And so I would say, honestly, even if those fields look differently, they have served me very well, although that's not the intention that I got in to do them.
Right.
One is because my open source ways, now help me thrive in, like, right now when there's so much openness around AI.
Yeah.
But also understanding how to build communities and work across multiple people with multiple skills, I think, is a big, powerful thing for how the future of AI will work, in my opinion.
Got it.
So then when I wanted to do a specialty, then radiology was a natural fit because there's a lot of like technology around radiology.
Yeah.
Like you have these big screens, you're in a dark room, and so, and then my specific specialty as an interventional radiologist, which is where you do minimal invasive surgery. That means that you're always innovating and thinking of the next step. So this idea of new technologies and disruption, much as people think that it will replace radiologists, is not new when it comes to thinking how we have always worked. We've always had new technologies come. Yes.
Right. We'll just talk about the intersection, like how does AI replace a human, but also curious, like, could you tell us more about your research? So you was working in this intersection of radiology and deep learning and healthcare. So also curious about that.
So actually, my passion is democratization. And, I think just having seen how people panicked when the big people, sort of big computer scientists were talking of how, we're going to be replaced. I think for me, the first thing I did was actually involve myself in educational activities, sort of outreach. And actually, I just stopped doing that in June and let someone else start running it. I was running a monthly journal club where we have a guest and we discuss like topics, a new paper that's come up or something that's of interest, which, I think really helped, because if I look at when we started that and the end, we stopped talking about will I be replaced to being like, oh, I tried this, or how can I do this, which I think was phenomenal. But so that was the initial stuff. So my passion, actually, I see technology as a substrate for doing good. And to be honest, I'm not so tied to medicine. It's easier to do it because I'm a physician. But when I think about technology, and I think growing back in Africa, I think about, poorly equipped schools. My village school still doesn't have a
Mm.
chemistry lab, and yet we have such advancements in technology and
Yeah.
reading sort of education tools that are still do not make it to the loss of like what I call the last mile. So my involvement in AI and radiology is the last mile for me is the clinician and the patient, you know.
Got it.
So right now we have a lot of digital tools in healthcare. It's really difficult because most of us, I think you've seen these reports that all the doctors hate the electronic medical records. So because, and so this new intersection of now we have new technology coming in, and it's coming in at a quick rate.
Mm.
So one of the things that I'm looking at is how do you work with technologies?
Right.
How do they help you as a radiologist do a better job? How do they open up your blind spots? So all
Mhm.
this, I would say, is an intersection of sort of like psychological studies and cognitive sciences, which is really the essence of the future of work.
Right.
How does it do when I'm tired? How does it do when I'm starting out very early, like in my training, versus very specialized? Because I think the AI for those two sort of doctors is very different. And
Mm.
so, and this is a place where AI can truly add value. So I'm very involved in sort of this future of work type of research, which is what we recently got funded by the NSF.
Mhm.
Another area that I'm interested in is and starting to work with is the area of a bias. I think we've had amazing researchers who have looked at, an AI system, will
Mm.
not identify you when you're black or you're
Yep.
dark skinned or brown skinned. And so, but my experience is that we have a lot of bias actually in healthcare in the clinical pathway, ignoring
Interesting.
AI. And that's just been my personal experience. And I think there's a real opportunity to start
Mhm.
analyzing large types of data, which would be difficult for me if you say, like, hey, where have we shown bias in our healthcare system? It's hard for me to answer that question. But
Yeah.
by looking at patterns and features, when we sort of start to explore the data, when we have these new AI tools, I think is of a lot of interest. And I'm hoping to spend a lot of time looking at clinical pathways and how they relate to patient outcomes and sort of transparency and fairness in
Mhm.
terms of provision of healthcare. My other sort of passion is around policy. I think we will have new rules that come up,
Yeah.
and so to be able to do research that changes policy is
Mhm.
fantastic. I think it's a grand idea, maybe too grandiose, but we this is something that I'm very interested in because you know, um, because as physicians, you're always an advocate for your patient, and so
Right.
if if you have those sort of like those intersection skills, then you have to think about sort of policy. And I can give you an example of other fields that are starting to do this. So, for example,
Mhm.
if a autonomous vehicle company came and said, you're going to save money and you should give us subsidies because autonomous cars cause less accidents, right?
Right.
And we've had researchers who've gone ahead and looked at, do autonomous cars cause less accidents, and looked
Mhm.
at that as a study questions, and who
Yep.
are they safe for? And they show that then you look at the road traffic accidents today and you see that they're mainly by older cars. Obviously there are other human factors that
Yeah.
cause accidents, but these are mainly older cars. But when you think about uh, newer newer cars, they already have some level of automation, maybe
Yeah.
level 0 or level 1, but they are a little safer. And
Mhm.
so if you look at the cost, the people who will
Yeah.
afford autonomous cars already drive safer cars. So that theory,
That's an amazing fact.
in itself, when you sell and you make cities pay for subsidies, is can be misleading. I'm not saying that they shouldn't get subsidies. So I do think we'll have this type of cases in healthcare as we start to
Right.
use more AI tools and in diagnosis and patient care.
I think it's amazing that you're so aware of the technology. You were just talking about level 0 and level 1. How I look at it is like back in the day, someone even called this automation because we have like automatic gears and all. So to someone,
Mm-hmm.
that's also a level of automation. Like people from
Yes,
50s wouldn't imagine that at all.
yes, yes, yes.
And you were talking about biases in the data sets and the model. So I assume like the democratization that you're working on with the open source efforts from you and all other efforts. So I think that will help get rid of that. What are your thoughts on the current prevailing biases? Because something that I'm personally surprised by, and Rachel Thomas talks a lot about this. Would have her talks linked in the description. But these systems are already in production, so people are actually using a lot of these things that have a lot of biases in them.
Mm-hmm.
So
So
curious on your thoughts.
yeah, so at least in my institution, I'm just very early. This is my month one, really, and I've been in medical institutions. I cannot say. I think maybe just for stroke triage is what we are maybe using in production, but I think this wouldn't be the status quo for a long time. We're gonna see more and more. And for us, it's not like some of these other like places like policing where we know they have sort of large scale implementations. Those are really thank God, at least where I work, I wouldn't say we're that outright,
Yeah.
but I think there's a role for democratization, and I think if we made a lot of data available, I think I like the Stanford radiology group led by Kat Langklotz and Matthew Langren work there, and they have a fantastic job where they release a lot of data. We have the mimic data set, which now will have radiology images. I think you need, so the education has sort of evolved. It's still a high barrier for entry, in my opinion. I mean, even like with the fantastic course by Jeremy, we still have a very, very high barrier for people to get involved.
Yeah.
But everyone else talks about data. And then the other realization, to be honest, is like GPU. True, you have Google Colab and Kaggle, but it's still not enough. I don't know about your experience, but like right now with the ongoing SIIM ECR pneumothorax competition, without GPUs at home, you wouldn't be able to participate in that competition. And obviously, there are roles to sort of incentivize people to make models that work on lower, number of hardware.
Yeah.
But so I think the democratization portion and the openness, there's still a lot of work to be done. Now, that being said, that's one barrier, and that's more of like people who are more technically involved. But then there's the other reality of how do these systems get into production.
Right.
And so if I see how we've sold the electronic medical records or other systems in the past, we usually, I say, this is what happens. The doctors are not involved. The person who's the salesperson goes, plays golf with the boss and says, gee, this is going to save you money. And then the next day, we have a system that I have to use. I'm telling you, this is what happens every time. And so I worry that the AI vendors will realize that this is how you sell software. And so just because I'm in radiology and I hold myself to a different standard of accountability when I do I make a model and I want to test it, it doesn't mean that a different department is going to hold themselves to the same standard. So not even just outside threats when you buy software. I think we're going to start to see in-house threats that affect bias and can cause harm, just because even in a big healthcare system, it's not standardized of how we should do innovation and how we should tackle AI and machine learning. And so I've had people tell me that they were consulted on a project where people are saying, gee, this is just a proof of concept. We don't need the test data. We don't need a validation data set.
One of the very scary examples that I know of is the Paranhos company in Silicon Valley. There's this movie about it, and it's pretty scary. And this has happened, so people like have gone through that phase already.
Yes, yeah. I just so the thing about moving to Atlanta is that I have a long commute now, like more than I'm used to, and I just finished listening to Paranhos podcast, and I was like, I had the same reaction that this is off the off script, but I had the same reaction thinking, how did all these smart people in the board not see that this didn't make sense? And it's possible. You're right. It's really possible because people are hungry for change. healthcare needs change. But
For context for the audience, the book is called Bad Blood, and if I remember correctly, millions of dollars were sort of completely wasted in this effort.
yes, yes.
Yep. Um, so I know you've been critical of the prevailing thought that an AI is replacing a human expert. People talk a lot about it, and like I get it, there's some amount of marketing behind it. But as a domain expert, what are your thoughts on a machine learning algorithm working along with a radiologist, for example? And do you think it's a better idea to replace a human with time, or do you think like these should work in sync with each other?
I mean, my selfish way would be to not be replaced.
Yeah.
I to pay my mortgage. But I think the people that say replacement do not understand how we
Hmm.
work. Now, granted, I do believe that we will work with AI. This is
Right.
going to happen. At least when I'm practicing,
Mhm.
this will happen. The technology has just evolved at a very different rate. And when you're in an academic institution, you're a little bit shielded, to be honest,
Hmm.
because you're not like in Google, or you're not at Facebook or Apple, where they're building this technology so fast,
Yeah.
So here it's like, oh, okay, I build this, classification detector, and people are happy, and it takes a year. By the time I get published, it's 2 years. That's
Mhm.
not the timeline in real world.
That's true.
Now, um, now maybe we won't require many radiologists. I don't know. No one knows the future, to be honest. You can just prepare for it.
Yeah.
But maybe there may be task shifting, right? So maybe people who are sort of like who usually like physician assistants will be able to read studies on their own, and they won't require radiology. So this is up for debate. So maybe you can do a podcast in future for a debate.
Yeah.
But I think, well, I have had Dr. Matt Langren from Stanford say he tells his students and postdocs, and I mean they attract a good number there because of Andrew Ng, is they should aim to replace the radiologist. So that should be their target.
Mhm.
And so it's not happened yet, but and I think that the challenge of when someone says be replaced is that like they don't, especially when you don't understand the nature of work, because you're
Yeah.
always like, oh, they just look at this imaging. I think that shows a little bit of naivety, and it's a shame that's come from very prominent names. I think
Mhm.
the places where we win is collaboration, and that's
Right.
because you know like I started this podcast by telling you that technology is a substrate.
Hmm.
Like it accelerates something, but
Yeah.
right now we have our blind spots. We hate the technology we use for taking care of patients, so assuming that you're going to dump a new technology and we'll like it is misplaced. And
Mhm.
then there are real opportunities to do well. And I'll try and give you an example. So when you start, let's say you get a CT scan of the abdomen,
Right.
and sometimes we do this in multiple phases, so we call that a triple phase CT
Okay.
abdomen. And what happens is the multiple phases, when I started off as a first year radiology resident, what
Mhm.
I was trying to figure out is what are these phases, like, because it's like, what's this visual information that I have to assess and
Mhm.
consume, right? Now, when a patient is looking at that study, they're like, these are ugly pictures. We've done research on this. And
Mhm.
they're like, why are they black and white,
Hmm.
And then when, let's say, an attending is looking, or a senior resident is looking at this study, then at that point, what they're saying is, oh, maybe I just want to measure my volumes accurately.
Right.
And then me as a interventionalist, when I look at this study, I just want to figure out, okay, what's the blood supply to these tumors? How am I going to get this chemotherapy really quickly to this tumor? And how am I going to shorten the procedure time to
Mhm.
make sure that the patient is not complaining of their back because they've been laying on the table for so long, and we have complete treatment. So
Yeah.
see, I looked at one set of images, right? A
Mhm.
triple phase CT abdomen, but I showed you how the context varies from a very early trainee to a patient,
Yeah.
to the requiring doctor, to a senior radiologist, and to a subspecialist radiologist, because we look at this one set of images, but their context for use is different.
Hmm.
And I still don't know any AI tool that can do that. So we'll
Right.
have another prediction tool, another alert, and people will get tired of them. They won't use them. But to sort of figure out what's helpful, I think I personally think that that's a real opportunity when you build AI to figure out what's the value add. And I
Yeah.
think we do need a better job of doing that.
Mhm.
Nonetheless, I do think that the grand challenge of AI would be to be able to see. I do think that this would be the killer app if there was something like that. It would be able to come into my conversation as an agent
Mhm.
and listen to me talking to a patient and record my notes and record them in context that we can review how, there's so many signals that are generated. Maybe the patient stopped, they were sad, they were crying, all these sort of context that we completely miss when I'm just reading through another note would
Mhm.
be, I think, and they don't have to go back and do crazy documentation that's meaning, not helpful for the next doctor, but it's helpful for billing. It's the same sort of analogy, but yes.
Right.
So for the medical students and residents listening to this podcast, I don't think we will be replaced, but we will be AI for sure.
Okay. I think Sebastian Thrun and even Jeremy. So Jeremy, when like, this is my interpretation of his thoughts, but when he was at Analytic, they did say that they're doing better at using AI compared to doctors. But
Mhm.
still, his opinion is like using AI with a human in the loop, because for both the people, that's when the creativity of a human shines out. So these
Yes.
tools allow us to be more creative. So we were talking about this killer app, but in essence, it'll also take care of your role as a like advanced doctor that you were just talking about, I think.
Yes, yes, yes. And the truth is, we have blind spots. We make mistakes in healthcare, and so
Mhm.
even just reduce those mistakes would be amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there are opportunities, but everyone is focused on replacing,
Mhm.
and also it's not just the technology point of view, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's people, right? So there are other things in the hospital that people do, like who will you sue with AI,
Hmm. Yeah.
or who will the surgeon call when they need someone else
Hmm.
to help them figure out, a case that they're going to the OR with.
I think with time, some of these might become obvious. For example, now what I understand that we use some machines, for example, in when we're doing surgeries for drilling in it, etc. Like earlier, it wasn't a case, but now it's obvious that this is a better option. So I believe with time this may improve, but that's still open for debate.
Yes, yes.
For context, could you tell us like what's the current situation like? So what tools are showing promise right now, and what I think could be like these future tools?
I think if I was to say, if you're an investor, I think education.
Right.
Education is probably one of because I mean, you have this massive workforce that's AI illiterate, right?
Hmm.
And most of the things out there is like hard math.
Yeah.
No one is going to go back to school to do this. And also, even if there's a wealth of resources out there, it's really confusing where to get started.
Yep.
Very overwhelming. So I would say education and sort of outreach. I would say we are still very early. And, we don't have good ways of figuring out how to annotate data,
Hmm.
right? Because healthcare has a lot of data, it's not usable.
Yeah.
You know, it's very expensive to pay a radiologist to annotate data. So there's an opportunity around those sort of like the basic building blocks before you can be like, oh, this is changing lives. And then remember, I told you I want to do research around policy. Those are
Yeah.
some of the questions you can start to answer. So, sometimes you could say, well, if you didn't use this AI tool, maybe you improved your turnaround time, because most of these AI tools and the optimization, like maybe a triad school, I
Yeah.
feel they're being geared towards sort of like operations metrics, like, oh, I want my studies read in 1 hour and I don't want to hire someone else because I
Right.
want this person to read them.
Hmm.
And I think, so we don't really know on a large scale, once we're starting to use this, how many are they missing,
Hmm.
how like what other, like if we didn't have this AI tool, would we have done a different sort of intervention, or we'd not have done an intervention? So
Yeah.
we have all these sort of new areas that we haven't asked. But I would say what's working right now, data sets. If you have a data set that you want to release, and this is also like a shift, because some people are so, they think that, and there's the venture capitalists have put in a monetary value on data, so everyone is holding their data, and obviously there are legal implications. Like if your data set is not well anonymized, so there's a consequence.
Yep.
But I would say, people who've released data sets, I think are seeing progressive innovation around those data sets, because the community is hungry for medical data sets and is consuming them, and they keep improving them. So if you look at the NIH chest X-ray data sets, it's probably one of the most used, right?
I was just going to talk about that. So I was lucky enough to have Dr. Alexander, the winner of the RSNA pneumonia challenge. And he also mentioned the same dataset that I think is by Ron Summers.
Yeah, Ron Summers, yes.
So he mentioned that it's one of the innovating datasets to like lead this idea.
Yes. And so, so if you look at education, anyone who's doing a MOOC or offering a course, I think people are hungry for that. So that's still not even an app. I would say data sets. And open source has not been very well adopted, but I think there's a big opportunity for infrastructure. And this is tough because, if you look at some companies like Google, I think they said they rewrote their Google Translate so that it would work with AI. I think Google Maps too. But that's not possible in healthcare. We use very archaic architecture. So how will you work with this new technology? So I think that's still not a gap. It's still a gap. If you think about a cloud strategy, most people haven't moved to the cloud and are not willing to move to the cloud. So even if you're sending some, maybe an image to the cloud, then it's processed and then send the results back. So that these workflows that we have to manage and new expectations even before we can be like, oh, we're starting to make impact. But I would say people don't seem as excited to figure out the prediction tools, but and that's because I think we have a lot of opportunity to study outcomes. So for example, we will predict death, or we will predict acute kidney failure, and then so what? Like what's the so what part? And those questions I think are tough to study and are important. And specifically for radiology, I would say anything to do good volume measurements would be because I do this every time and I hate it. I'd be happy a computer taking that over from me. And then I see a lot of tools coming in for triage, so you have a big long list and it's saying, hey, you should read this one study before, because maybe the patient is bleeding or something bad is happening. So
I think we were talking about this earlier also, so about GPUs being used here and all that stuff. But for me personally, like I wouldn't use anything unless it's fast enough. For example, we have all these amazing assistants on our phone, and unless and until I think even like we get to a stage where medical applications could be run on such devices. And I remember that my mother had to get a CT scan and we had to like travel a lot because even that machine is pretty big and it wasn't available in our city.
Yes.
So that's another challenge, I assume, like with all of the medical equipment also being involved here.
Yes. And also, you cannot modify some of the things that you can do that I've seen, like, oh man, that's a really good application. You cannot run it. You cannot change the machine, because if you change the machine, then you have to get new FDA certification. No vendor wants to do that because it takes a long time, and AI changes so fast. I mean, if you're sort of like an executive and you're listening to this, I would say, do not buy AI. You should rent it at most if you have to, because it's more of almost like, this is a bad analogy, but almost having bought a Nissan Leaf and now there's a Tesla. This technology is changing so fast that that's the truth. If you even look at the PhDs who are in traditional academic programs, if they're not outside and reading archive and trying out as many things, they just get behind people who are studying this as a subject.
I think I'm not too sure, but not many of medical research is published on archive from what I know.
No, because we like peer review for us. So,
Mhm.
and that's right now, honestly, with the Radiology AI journal, which is online, quick, very quick turnaround times, there's no motivation, to be honest, to be stuck on, archive. I understand that, and this has been actually an interesting mental shift,
Yeah.
given when you work with collaborators who are computer scientists, which is like the norm to
Mhm.
publish in archive versus something else, and it's a balance. But yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Uh, Also, coming to your recent grant from NSF, a huge congratulations to you on receiving the grant for, I'll quote the title of the abstract, Measuring Learning Gains in Man-Machine Assemblage when Augmenting Radiology Work with AI. Uh,
Yes.
could you tell us more about the projects and what problems will the grant allow you to take on?
I think it's really what I talked earlier about in this sort of recording, which is around the future of work. And
Mhm.
so we're merging two fields, like on human factors and cognitive science. And I mean, if I was to give a specific example, I could say if I have to read a study for a patient who had cancer, and they have studies in other sites, right? And I do not present those studies, and so that would be like a radiologist explanation of cognitive fit. Even if
Mhm.
they're the best radiologists, they cannot do a good job, right? So
Yeah.
because to do a good job, you need to be able to tell me if the cancer is the same, better, or worse, right?
Mhm.
And so if you do not present the previous information and you don't present it in a consumable way, then the radiologist will be blind to that.
Yeah.
But then the other factors for radiologists, we know about the length of our shifts, the type of studies we're reading. There's a difference in complexity. There's uncertainty when we report, even if it's not um, documented that this is uncertainty, just because of the way we report our studies. So all these sort of other human factors that affect our work, what we're saying is, okay, great, you've built an algorithm that detects pneumonia more than the radiologist, but
Yeah.
the radiologist is not just reading chest x-rays, they're reading CT scans, they're reading MRI scans, they're reading chest x-ray, they're not just reading pneumonia. So when you put all this model zoo in the desert, how
Mhm.
does the radiologist work? Do they get 5 different alerts because other models are corrupting each other and
Mhm.
starting to give false results?
Mhm.
And so those are sort of like the avenues we'll be looking at, specifically how the radiologists work, how and then also trying to actually improve, because previously I think we've had unidirectional. You train your data at one point and then say it's better than radiologists, instead of saying, okay, if I'm using this AI tool that's doing contours, now I'm at a point where the model learns, okay, Judy changed these contours, maybe they were not very good, so it
Mhm.
keeps that image and then goes back and retrains and then sees how when it has to recontour for me a liver or a kidney on the next study, how it performs.
From
So
what I understand, these tools, even as of 2019, are still very brittle in the sense that they're pretty brittle to adversarial changes and even like
yes,
what
yes.
you were just talking about.
Yeah, and also what was interesting, actually, one of the papers talked about that, the more just my model, if I can be adversarial to your model, even if they're not doing the same task. So, I'm just sort of looking at the bigger picture, like how will we, essentially the question we're trying to do is how do we move this the amazing technology that comes up,
Yeah.
honestly, even if it's better than radiologists or same, or makes our lives easier, how do we move it to the bedside that it
Hmm.
actually improves patient care?
Right.
And so that's why we'll be studying this. And I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier when I said I think the learning needs are also different
Mhm.
at every level. And so you can imagine it's almost like having a personalized agent or AI assistant based on the tech, on the study you're reading and the question that you may have and the need you may have.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I now want to shift the conversation to another area that you've been very active in recently, open source contributions, again in the medical domain. So
Yeah.
one question would be like, this was in the, I think you started when not many people were putting out open source projects in this domain because of, again, the legalities involved. So what got you interested in open source back in the day? I'm sure you must have faced some amount of resistance when you were working on these?
Actually, mine was very different because I got involved when I was in Kenya. There wasn't anything,
Okay.
and so I was very lucky to be in this situation where, these amazing doctors were trying to build an EMR to help one of the programs where I went to medical school take care of HIV patients, and
Mhm.
so, from the word go, their intention was to share the code because then there wasn't any monetary value in remaining closed, right? People
Yeah.
couldn't afford it. So
Mhm.
by sharing, you could let other people customize, you could let other people adapt it for their problem. So we've written actually a paper on this, how open innovation works in
Right.
society. And I think it's driven by a common problem, you
Mhm.
know. And so the common problem there was, how do we know how to take care of a certain group of patients, maybe then our struggle was we didn't know who had what drugs were working, who was
Yeah.
hungry, who was not able to take their drugs, who died. And so, I think when you build technology, when you're trying to solve a problem, then the other principles, I think it's just sort of who the person is. I'm getting into trouble because of open source, because that's how I've always viewed my projects. I do them in the open, I look for collaborators.
Yeah.
And so that for me, as a like, it wasn't hard for me to relearn, because that's how I learned from the word go, that we can put these things in the open and create interesting business cases to allow companies to make money from them, but also to make society better.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, um, so it was sort of like another happy accident,
Okay.
but yeah. Yeah, I don't know how, like most of the stuff I do, I just
It's
put,
passion driven.
yeah, it's just out there. And because you get amazing feedback, I mean, if you think about one of the most powerful courses today is, Fast AI. And
Yeah.
why? Because it has a fantastic community and it's out there in the open. No single advert. I can rewatch the videos many times. you know there
Mhm.
is a place for open source, and I'm glad big companies are starting to figure this out. Now today you don't have to train a model from scratch, right? Because people use open source,
Yeah.
because I think the business value and the distinguishing factor comes to how you take care of your customer and all those other things, more than trying to hide one piece of software.
Got it.
Yeah.
Also curious about, so I'm from India. I understand the difference between medical and engineering. So how did you get started in open source? Like how did you get started with the learning process? Because I'm sure like medical studies are in itself very, very challenging, and you were also active in open source back in the day.
Yeah, the truth is because I couldn't afford medical school. So I was working in computers to make some extra money, and then I
Okay.
ended up, yeah. That
So
that is
that's
that is
how you found your passion also.
yeah. It's
Okay.
yeah, it's what happened.
Got it. Also curious if you could share about your open source projects, Open MRS and Labor Health. Could you tell us
Yeah,
about
so
these projects and your role in them?
so I started off with OpenMRS, and that's because Eldoret, Kenya, was the first site where this was implemented.
Mhm.
And then there was a developer who would come, probably the first developer, and we would hang out on Fridays and code. And that's how I actually ended up learning Java, because my first programming language was Pascal.
Okay.
I cannot write anything in that anymore. But
I don't
uh,
think anyone can.
yeah,
Even.
but the interesting thing is actually when just to implement OpenMRS the first time, it took me like 2 weeks. We
Mhm.
didn't have good internet, so that's actually when I started learning. And so that was a little challenging. My home did not have electricity, so I bought this computer that I would keep in my uncle's place and go and try and work on it there during the day. But I was
Mhm.
very interested in sort of getting how computers worked. And
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit easier when I enjoyed it a lot. I
Right.
mean, I get very obsessed even now. Like, I can stay the whole night working on something.
I was
And
going through your GitHub profile and I think you were trying a PyTorch implementation of chess X
yes,
resin
yes, yes,
something like
I'm
that.
working on that right now. Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's actually updating it to the most recent PyTorch
Yeah.
version.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do. And so yeah, so so that's how I ended up sort of starting to contribute, and then I started learning. And then for me, it's always been project based. I pick a project and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know why I picked this up. And then I just put my head to it and I put my head down and work on it. But over the time, what I've realized is it's nice to build a network of people you can ask questions from. So it's this concept of you shouldn't have a blocker for more than like for, by the next sundown, the next sunset.
Okay.
And, that means I'm not working on the same problem for a week,
Right.
because I have people I can ask, like, hey, what do you think about this? And also, speaking as a female, sometimes you want to have like a safety net of people you can like ask what would be appear as stupid questions. And I'm so lucky. It's not just, I have so many males who are always eager, and I can ask them my stupid questions anytime. And so that's built a lot of my confidence. And now, I also improved on some things, like, which was helpful with open source, was I improved on code reading. So I can go through code and be like, okay, I know this is what's happening.
Right.
Then, I wasn't afraid of searching. I learned how to search for the solutions on Google. So sometimes I'll be like, oh, I don't know what this is, and go back and try and figure it out. So I would say I've gotten very good problem solving skills in terms of programming, and that's been super helpful, because
I'm
sometimes
just fresh out of my CS degree, so we have this internal joke that computer science is 10% knowledge and 90% knowing how to Google.
yeah, and people are afraid of them and are ashamed of them, but I flag a lot of duplicate questions on Stack Overflow, actually, because, I'm like, oh, that's been answered and I know this, and so, yeah, so I think build a network, practice, 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 I think is how I've gotten better. I just pick a project and I'm like, okay, so like today I have a problem right now because I'm trying to do bounding boxes and then use that for a segmentation task. So it's sort of like an ensemble, and I have never done that before, so I have to figure it out.
Yeah, I think it's also about like people like you that sort of tend to give back. So again, you creating these communities so where people are comfortable with asking any questions. So it's again like if we all can come together and democratize, similar to the Fast A family, all of these things.
Yes. I do have my network of family that does that a lot, and it's fantastic. And yeah. So, and I go through phases where I'm like, oh, I'm not good, blah, blah, blah. Then someone will ask me a question and I'll be like, oh, this is how I do it. And I'll be like, oh, okay. Okay, got it. But yeah, so it's very varied, but I would say that that's how I troubleshoot my problems. But working on a project, because I always remember, like, like, what problem am I trying to solve is I think it's super important and helpful. That's
Got it.
been very helpful for me. Yeah.
Also, if you could tell us more about Open MRS and Library Health, what
Yes.
are these looking at?
So my current involvement of open source actually is with Libre Health.
Mhm.
And if any of your listeners here is looking for a project, I need some people to help out.
We'll
And
have the links to join the projects in the
yes.
description.
So one of the specific projects I'm working on is, so we have good open source tools for the database of radiology images. So we have something called DCM4Chair and Authanc. Very fantastic projects, good communities. Authanc is fantastic. And then we have sort of like the EMR type of things, Libre Health EMR, Open MRS EMR.
I'm sorry, what does EMR stand for?
Oh, electronic medical record.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
but what's missing is like the manager for the radiologist workflow. And that we call, in the US, they call that radiology information system. So so that's what I've been working on, trying to build a radiology information system. And that just means, hey, now I know that the patient has gotten a study. I know that, it needs to be read by someone, giving them some tools to help them read and do a good job. So that's sort of like, it's like a doctor assistant for management. So nothing to do with AI. But the interesting project where I need help with is, in the US, it's very expensive to pay for voice recognition.
Okay.
And back home, we need a better voice recognition system. that's medical, and I would like to just do like transfer learning to train a voice system to help us identify medical records,
Okay.
like radiology reports. So,
Interesting.
we've been hopeful that we'll get a student. It's open source, so progress is always slow. But we've
Yeah.
been hopeful. We always get Google Sum of Code students, and we're hopeful that we will get an interested person to help us sort of do that voice recognition piece for the software, which is a real gap for doing radiology in developing countries.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
So,
where does audio come into the picture? So I'm not clear on
because
that part.
because the way we do studies here is you just pick up your a microphone and you just dictate your findings, and then
Okay.
they become audio to text because it's
Got it.
faster. Yeah.
Got it.
So
Got
other people can use um, text typing and all those things, but for us, it's if we could have a little bit of a voice tool to help us sort of help the doctors document faster.
because the current system missed most of the technical terms. Is that the reason?
So you have to. So the current systems are not medically trained, so
Right.
lots
Mhm.
of errors there. Yeah, you cannot. They're not usable.
Got it.
Yeah, I always try Google speech all the time, like the voice, but it's still you cannot dictate a report as
Got
quickly
it.
as I can do with the proprietary systems. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
So could you tell someone what would be your best advice for someone who's from the medical domain and looking to get started with maybe both deep learning and also with open source? What would be your best advice to them? Because these are two very separate fields.
Yeah, so I would say if you're a medic, go to the American College of Radiology. You will find a lot of like-minded people,
Mhm.
and most importantly, go to the best society in the world, which is a SIM, Society of Imaging Informatics in Medicine.
Right.
Fantastic people, geeks who are doctors, geeks who are not non-doctors. I mean, this is the one conference I can go to and just be in a t-shirt and I'm happy, and it's just fantastic conversation. So, and so definitely go there. You'll find family and you'll find a way to get started.
Mhm.
Um, then, if you're sort of learning on your own, in terms of um, there are many tools out there. I think Kaggle, Google Colab, if you
Yeah.
do not have GPUs. And then just look at the competitions. There's so much wealth of information in the discussions
Hmm.
in Kaggle and the ongoing conversations. But if you're sort of a little bit technical savvy, I would highly, highly recommend the Fast AI course. I mean, that's always my answer to that in terms of learning, because it's a fantastic course. And to be able, honestly, on right now, to be able to read just a technical paper and not just maybe make sense of the math, but
Yeah.
everything else makes sense and I can explain it back.
Hmm.
It's only possible because of Fast AI. I would say that. The
I
rest was
am a huge fan and I'm very grateful to Jerry
yeah.
Rachel also. So I've been a huge fan of the course since it came out.
Yeah, and then the other side of open source, come to LibreHealth. That's what I would say. The first thing, just come and introduce yourself. That's
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
When you come introduce, you'll find work, and it's very communal. And honestly, you're right. It's about pay forward, and I don't do these things to sort of get credit or get,
Right.
like anything else, but I end up like people will write to me and I've made friends all over the world, and it's just really personally rewarding. And
I think it's
sometimes
again because as we were talking, it's again a passion project for you rather than
yes, I still do it. I mean, even now, even when I'm so busy, I still find time to do Google Sum of Code because it's fantastic, and we have these new people who come. So actually one of my mentees is Priyansu, who actually lives in India,
okay.
and he was a Google Sum of Code student with us maybe 2 years ago, and he
Mhm.
just randomly came across this project I was working on, and he's like, "Oh, I'm good in Python, and what's this thing? What's this AI?" I sent him away, and I was like, "Go watch this video," and he did. And now we have an accepted paper that he worked on
Wow.
together, and we are working on a different project. But it's fantastic to see this one person who had nothing, zero knowledge about AI,
Mhm.
is now a super learner. and so it's just fantastic, just to see these people flourish. I find a lot of personal um, satisfaction from it. Yeah. So
Got it.
that's my long answer. But if you're interested in open source, come to LibreHelp, ping me on anyway. I'm happy. I need more help. I have a lot of work to do. And if you're a medic, go to SIM. Go to
Mhm.
SIM. SIIM. It's just really the place where you have family. Then yeah.
Got it. What would be your best advice in terms of? I think firstly it would be your answer, but for someone who's looking for both, has an interest in medical domain and is looking for a MOOC or a book, maybe for both,
For
maybe
to
medical
learn
and
medicine.
yeah, someone from deep learning maybe looking to get a break into medicine.
To be honest, I would say collaborate.
Okay.
This is not supposed to be a dismissive thing. I think even Jeremy says it. It's easier to teach a medic to
Mhm.
understand the technical portions than
Mhm.
the other way around. So the way I do it is I team up with people who are interested, and then as they teach me the technical stuff, I'm teaching them the medical stuff. So it becomes
Interesting.
we all end up learning from each other. There's really, I mean, you're just gonna go down the rabbit hole. But maybe you're right. You need to come up with like a simple medical terms. But I feel like most people get a better sense if you collaborate. If you look for a collaborative partner and work with them. So same like you when you go and just rotate or observe in a hospital, you see so many things. But if you for my project even now, when we start a project, I say this is why this is important. And I explain to them like this is the 101 medicine course. But you're challenging me. Maybe we need to democratize the other way around, to make it. It's true. Maybe like the same things that I have to explain to someone, I could try and make it available for other people who want to get started.
I think I'm not sure if this will be out as a MOOC, but Doctor, I think Jeremy is involved in a MOOC or some course there also.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, I also want to ask you, how do you keep up with the cutting edge? Because there's this huge outflow, and also what innovations are you most excited about? The current innovations in the medical domain.
So the way I keep actually in touch is using Twitter. I
Okay.
have a good sort of, I think I've curated a good sense of. The problem with that is you can also be very blind because you're always in
Mm,
your chamber, right?
yeah.
But I spend time and I will click if someone posts something nice, then I'll sort of go back and look at them. So I think that's how I kind of get a sense of what to read or a good topic. I'm increasingly interested right now with paper reviews.
Okay.
I've really enjoyed. I think Rachel Tatman does that a lot. She's
Yeah.
fantastic. I just love, listening to her go through a paper. I came across some from Microsoft actually. They're
Mhm.
doing that. So I've enjoyed that. So I spend a lot like YouTube type of things. And then I also take advantage of Google Scholar Alerts. So if
Okay.
there's like a big paper like in medicine that is, maybe a landmark paper or, the paper that I thought was well written, is then I track how it flows and how it comes back to, being like, okay, this is what's important for this. And so I do that. And then um, just also friends just sharing like, oh, hey, did you see this? So I have a lot of people where we brainstorm ideas and you see, that's the thing. If I wasn't in open source, I'd be like, oh, it's my idea. Now that
Yeah.
way, I'm like, oh yeah, what do you think about this? And so I always end up planning. One thing I'm doing this month, just because I'm not so clinically busy, is I'm doing a lot of reviews for papers, and I'm learning a lot from them because that means I have to go read and look at the literature and do all those things. And
Yeah.
I really wanna become a very good reviewer. And there's some tools like Open Review, so you can go read a paper and
Mm.
decide on your review and then go back. Honestly, this is maybe some of the principles I learned earlier about self-directed learning from a medical school pay off huge because I'm able to be like, okay, I'll look at this, or this is why this is important. Because I mean, you cannot consume everything. It's just
Right.
impossible. Yes.
Also
And
want to give a shout out. Uh, also want to give a shout out to a community that I am active in, Data Science Network. You can join it from dsnet.org. We do a lot of paper reading sessions, virtual ones. So everyone can join online, and also we have a study group for fast A if anyone's interested.
Awesome.
Before we conclude, what would be your best advice to someone who feels intimidated by maybe deep learning and also all of these advanced, if I may, terms like radiology, and how do you apply these technology to that?
I think just don't get overwhelmed.
Hmm.
Honestly, even I still struggle with things. So you're not alone. Don't get overwhelmed. Keep working at it, and then also be organized. To be honest, one other thing I would say though is that if you blog or write summaries, it's a really good way of understanding something. You know. So I keep a notebook when I'm doing stuff. I'm now going back. Right now I'm rewatching the first AI lessons because I didn't watch the Swift ones, and I wasn't part of my course this year. And I'm creating templates. I'm being like, okay, this is how I'm going to be reporting this. So don't worry about this, and then you can share it if you don't, or you just keep notes for yourself. But everyone, people who say they don't struggle with this, they're lying, or you're just egotistical. Everyone has imposter syndrome. So you just have to recognize what you're able to do and just work at it. I do believe that is possible to get better at doing whatever you want to do.
That's amazing advice. I'd also have Rachel's advice on blogging linked because that's been personally very helpful. So Rachel's Thomas blog on how to get started on blogging was very helpful for me.
Yes. I wrote so many, and it takes a lot of time to write a good blog. You don't have to write something big, but it takes a lot of time. And so if you keep your mind and you're always like, okay, I'm going to do this, then it's good. It's helpful information for you when you forget and for other people.
Right. Yes. One thing that I'm sort of experimenting with is also like doing an online talk, doing just like a group reading session where I can present, because that also opens me up to, as we were talking about, my blind spots about what things I understand and I don't.
Yes, absolutely. I haven't tried that reading thing, which probably I should, but yeah.
Okay. Thanks for the great advice. Before we end the call, what would be the best platforms to follow your work?
I think I'm probably most active on Twitter now.
Okay. So we'll have it linked in the description for people. Thanks so much, Judy, for doing this interview. And thank you so much for all of your contributions to both the medical and the deep learning community.
I appreciate it. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give it a review or feel free to shoot me a message. You can find all of the social media links in the description. If you like the show, please subscribe and tune in each week to Chai Time Data Science.